I want to start today by telling you a story. My first language was Russian, and I learned to speak it fluently as a kid. And when I came to this country, I was plopped down into a public school where the teachers apparently had never heard of kids speaking any other language. So they spoke to me in English, which I didn't understand. And since they saw that I wasn't understanding, they kept raising their voice more and more, which didn't work. So they made some assumptions based on that. Their assumption was that I was pretty stupid. And they were apparently unaware of the richness of language that I had available to me. And historically, and Peter mentioned that as well, historically, this is how we have looked at animals. Animals have a richness of communication that we're just starting to find out. We're scratching the surface. And yet for years and years, we have assumed that they can't communicate, or if they can, it's at a simple level, and they're pretty stupid. So I'm glad to see us making progress. I'm glad to see this group thinking about these issues. So I want to talk about a couple of features here. And the reason the title is A Stroke of Genus is because I've spent a long time working with the genus Cynomes, which are prairie dogs. So first thing that I want to say is about the importance of phylogeny to understand the evolution of communication. And to do that, I want to talk very briefly about the discourse system theory, which was developed by my wife and colleague, Dr. Judith Kyriazis, and appears in my book, Chasing Dr. Dolittle. And what the discourse system theory says is that essentially, although we have a number of body systems available, there is a hidden system which we have missed. And that is a system that exists in partnership with other systems and integrates information with those systems and responds to evolutionary pressure. So the components are that there are morphological structures that receive signals. The signals are transmitted by neural cells, and the response is mediated by input from other body systems. And that is an important point of the system. So a signal is detected by specialized receptors. The nervous system or the brain decodes it. The discourse system integrates that response with other bodily systems and produces a response. And here you can see some of the other bodily systems that are involved in this. But the basic point is that the discourse system mediates the evolution, development, and specialization of communication systems, which means that the discourse system can predict that communication systems found in related species tend to be more similar than in unrelated species. So let me give you an example from our work with prairie dogs, with the phylogeny of prairie dogs. There are 5 species of prairie dogs in North America. They're only found in North America, in the grasslands of central and western North America. And if you look at the phylogeny of these species, basically the phylogeny is right in there. And you can see that this is sort of a phylogenetic tree that evolutionary biologists and phylogeneticists like to draw. And some species are more closely related than other species. And this is based on immunological and DNA analysis. So you have a very nice phylogenetic tree of the 5 species. Now, what we did was we had a person who wore a yellow shirt walking out in colonies of all of these different 5 species. And we recorded the alarm calls from each of these colonies, from multiple sites in each of these colonies. Then we did a cluster analysis and created a dendrogram of how the cluster analysis saw the similarity of these calls among the different species. And what you see here is a dendrogram which essentially is exactly the same as the phylogenetic tree. And I've used colors here to show you the different species that are on the phylogenetic tree and on our dendrogram. So basically, phylogeny and communication in this case are completely similar. So my point is that phylogenetic relationships can be important contributors to our understanding of the communication system of different species across species. Next thing that I want to talk about is the importance of linguistic analysis in understanding the complexity of communication. Our previous work showed that the alarm calls of prairie dogs, specifically the Gunnison's prairie dog, which we worked with, can distinguish between 4 different kinds of predators or species of predators: human, coyote, domestic dog, and hawk. Furthermore, the way that we analyzed this was we looked at sonograms of the alarm calls, and we measured a variety of variables on those sonograms having to do with basically changes of frequency versus time. Here you can see sonograms for hawk, human, coyote, and dog. And even though superficially they look fairly similar, with a little bit of inspection, they look different. And we used a discriminant function analysis to tell us that these are indeed significantly different. And our work also has shown that prairie dog alarm calls contain information about the shape and color of a predator. So not only do you have the species, you also have the color and shape. So if you were to walk out into a prairie dog colony wearing the clothes that you do, they would describe not only you as a human, but also your shape and the color of clothes that you're wearing. So we extended this analysis to see what kinds of variables are associated with the predators, the shapes, and the colors. And it turns out that there are unique variables that are associated with the predators, distinguishing between the predators, distinguishing between the shapes, and distinguishing between the colors. So this is kind of like, in human linguistic terms, like phonemes, putting together into words. And each alarm call, then, which is a brief chirp, sort of sounds like a bird chirp, sort of like, I can't do it. Anyway, all of that contains information not only about the species of the predator, the shape of the predator, and the color of the predator, kind of like a sentence. So here we show that you can take these kinds of information and break them down into finer units, which parallel what humans study in terms of human language linguistics. So another experiment that we did is to see what happens if the prairie dogs see a human walking alone, a dog walking alone through the colony, or a human walking a dog on a leash. Actually, it wasn't more like that. The dog was more well-behaved. So, discriminant function analysis. Sorry, I just did something here. Discriminant function analysis showed us that there were 3 different kinds of calls. One for a dog, one for a human, and one for the dog and human. And these are all significantly different. But we wanted to know further what goes into those calls. It's fine to look at this and say, okay, we have different calls, so what? What goes into any of this? So what we did was we looked at, again, the variables that were involved in these discriminations and what the values are. And I don't put the values up here because they're irrelevant to you, but here we see color-coded low values, medium values, high values, and equal values for these different variables. And what you can see is, look at the pattern between human and dog. And by the colors you can see, they're different. And this is what discriminant function tells us. And when you look at dog plus human, you can also see that the pattern is different for either human or for dog. But look at the equal part. There are some bunch of variables here that are equal in values for dog alone and for human plus dog together. So it's like the prairie dogs are conceptualizing everything and saying, okay, well, we know what a dog looks like. So we're identifying a dog here, but there's a strange relationship between this human and this dog, which we're going to call something else. We don't know what that something else is, we as investigators, but apparently the prairie dogs are able to make that conceptual leap that here's something that's a large quantity, some of which we understand, some of which we don't necessarily understand. So breaking down the alarm calls into descriptors that capture smaller components allows more fine-grained analysis, and this is what linguists do with human languages, trying to break it down into finer scale components. So the bottom line that I want to express now is that it's great to decode animal languages, but we need to think bigger. We need to think, okay, fine, here are languages for, here are things that are associated with different contexts. What are the components that go into that? How does that compare with human linguistics? Are there parallels between human languages and animal communication? I'm comfortable talking about animal language. I realize many people are not. But are there parallels between animal communication and human languages? And if so, if there are, then conceptually, for me at least, that breaks down the barrier that we have erected for so long, that we humans are the only ones with language. And there are all these other poor animals out there that don't have language. And I think instead that we have a continuum of language or language-like behavior. Humans are somewhere around here. Who knows, maybe whales might be there, or octopus might be somewhere beyond us. Who knows? Personally, I vote for octopus. But anyway, I think if we can look at this in a way that breaks this down and shows the parallels, of animal communication and human language, that this would go a long way towards dispelling this business of a large gap between us and the rest of the animal world. Anyway, thank you.
Just a minute or two for any questions. Yeah.
Do you think if you raised the prairie dogs in isolation, they would still make the same calls? So are the calls like learned from the other?
Well, I have only anecdotal data on that because personally, I'm against raising animals in isolation.
Yeah.
Personally, I don't like that to do that. And people have said, why don't you deafen prairie dogs and see if they produce the same calls? And no,
Yeah.
Sorry.
Quick question over there.
Yeah, just quick question. Two quick questions. Do you see any compositionality in different shape, colors, and objects? And second question, why color? Because you understand, yes, different kinds of predator, but color is to me less.
Actually, yes, Judith, let's do all the questions in one block. Judith, your question, and then you answer them all at once.
Yeah, do you know of parallels in the difference in other physiological responses they make to those different predators? And how do the patterns in other responses, whether it's hair raising or different sound outputs, parallel the changes in the sound you hear in the alarm?
Okay, and one more question.
I was wondering why you limited it to neuronal organisms as opposed to starting farther back.
So do your best with sort
This
of.
assumes that I can remember all of these questions.
Oh, I'll tell you what, having seated those questions, we're up to the next speaker, so pick up with Khan at the break. Thank you.
I was also going to mention that at the end of the day at 2:30, we're going to have a much longer period of time to pose all these questions. So we'll hold on to those, okay? Those are great questions.